She just wanted to be a mother. That was all she ever asked for in this life. Not wealth, not power, not recognition of any kind. Just a child she could hold and love and raise in the image of the woman her own mother had built her to become. That was her one prayer. And for 3 years, she prayed it faithfully, visited doctors, adjusted her diet, tracked every cycle, and quietly blamed her own body for an answer that never came. What she did not know, what she could not have imagined, was that the answer was not coming from God. It was not coming from her biology. It was coming from her kitchen, from a cup of tea made by a woman she had loved since she was 12 years old, from a man who stood beside her in church on Sundays and held her hand in fertility waiting rooms on Monday mornings. This is the story of Claire Harmon. And before it is over, everything you believe about trust is going to be tested. There are women who cry when they find out the truth. They scream. They break things. They call their mother, their pastor, their friends. That is what most people do. But Claire Harmon did none of those things. When she opened that kitchen cabinet on an ordinary Wednesday morning and found what she found, a small bag, a white powder, tucked behind the coffee she had been making every single day for 3 years. She did not cry. She did not panic. She did not wake her husband. She took a photograph. She took a small sample. She put the bag back exactly where she found it. Then she went upstairs, made herself a separate cup of tea from a different cabinet, and sat at her own kitchen table in silence. And she began to think. What you are about to hear is what she came up with. Over the next 22 months, Claire Harmon would uncover a betrayal so precise, so cold, and so long-running, that even the attorney who handled her case said she had never seen anything quite like it in 30 years of family law. She would discover that her husband of 4 years had been sleeping with her stepsister, the same woman, who had stood at her wedding altar in a cream-colored dress and smiled at her with what Claire had believed, with everything in her, was genuine love. She would discover that these two people had been deliberately preventing her from getting pregnant. Not by accident, not by some cruel twist of biology, but by design, every morning in her own cup of tea. And she would find something buried in a legal document that neither of them had thought about in years, something that would turn their entire plan against them. But she did not find all of that on one Wednesday morning. She built it, one careful piece at a time. By the time Raymond Harmon received his divorce papers on a Tuesday morning at his downtown Atlanta office, the case his wife had assembled against him was so thorough, so legally precise, and so completely documented that his own attorney told him privately there was nothing left to fight. The photographs, the lab report, the phone records, the medical affidavit, and the one clause in his own grandfather's will that everyone in the Harmon family had forgotten was there, the clause that would cost Raymond not just his marriage, but every dollar his family had ever built. Today, we are telling the full story, from the day Claire Harmon said yes to the day she walked away with everything. Stay with us, because this story does not end the way anyone expected. And that includes the two people who spent 3 years believing they had already won. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire Donovan was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where front porches were still used for sitting, and where the women who raised you made clear, through action, not words, that loyalty was not optional. Her mother, Patricia Donovan, was a precise, steady woman who worked as a receptionist at a law firm during the day and took on medical billing work at night when the bills required attention. Claire's father left the family when Claire was 7 years old. He did not write, he did not call. He simply became a man who used to live in the house. Patricia never spoke badly about him in front of her daughter. She simply moved forward. That was the first lesson Claire Donovan ever received about how a woman handles a man who fails her. She received it at 7 years old. She never forgot it. Claire grew up watching her mother handle everything with a composure that was not cold. It was focused. Patricia paid every bill on time. She made dinner every night. She attended every school event, every parent conference, every ceremony where her daughter's name was called. She was not the mother who cried at graduations. She was the mother who had planned for them. When Claire graduated from a state university in Georgia with a business administration degree, finishing near the top of her class while working 20 hours a week to help cover tuition, Patricia sat in the front row of that auditorium with her hands folded in her lap and an expression on her face that Claire later described as the most complete thing she had ever seen. It was not just pride, it was confirmation. A mother watching her daughter become proof that the plan had worked. Claire carried that image with her for the rest of her life. By the time Claire was 28, she was managing operations for a regional healthcare company in Atlanta. She was, by every professional measure, exactly who her colleagues described her as. Reliable, precise, a woman who did not need to raise her voice because she had already done the work that made the argument unnecessary. She had a close circle of friends, a strong relationship with her church community, and a clarity about what she wanted from life that some people spend decades searching for. She wanted a career that meant something. She wanted a home she had built with intention. She wanted a partner who understood the value of what he had found. And she wanted, more than almost anything else, to be a mother. To give a child what Patricia had given her. She believed those things were within reach. She was right about what she deserved. She was wrong about who was standing next to her when she found them. Vanessa Cole came into Claire's life at the age of 10, when their parents married after a 2-year courtship. Claire was 12. The blended family was not always easy in those early years. 2 girls with different histories, navigating shared spaces and step-parents and the work of learning each other's habits and edges. But what developed between them over the years that followed was something that, by any measure, looked genuine. Vanessa was bright, warm, socially fluent, always the person in any room who made others feel welcomed and remembered. She recalled every birthday. She showed up with food when someone was sick. She called to check in without any particular reason beyond the call itself. Growing up, Claire had come to think of her not as a step-anything, but simply as her sister. The woman she had grown up beside. The woman she trusted without examination. Because trust that has never been tested does not know it needs to be. By the time both women were in their late 20s, they had the kind of relationship their friends openly admired. They talked regularly. They traveled together. When Claire went through a difficult breakup at 26, it was Vanessa who drove to her apartment at 11 o'clock at night and sat with her until the worst of it had passed. Claire had not hesitated to call her. She had not thought twice. That is the level of trust built over nearly 2 decades. Trust that does not examine itself because it has never been given a reason to. There is a version of this story where Vanessa simply drifted into something she did not fully plan and could not find her way back from. There may be people watching right now who want to believe that version. The evidence, when it eventually came out, did not support it. What Raymond and Vanessa did to Claire Harmon was not a moment of weakness. It was a sustained campaign, and it had a deliberate beginning. Raymond Harmon was 40 years old when he entered Claire's life, and he carried with him the kind of presence that generational wealth and careful grooming produce in a man who has never had to wonder whether he would be taken seriously. He was the grandson of James Harmon, a black entrepreneur from Georgia who had started a small construction company in 1962 with a borrowed truck, a crew of 4 men, and a contract to clear land for a development outside Savannah. James Harmon was the kind of man that Black America produced in the post-war decades. Disciplined, unsparing, driven by a vision of what he was building not just for himself, but for every generation that would follow. He grew his company from 4 employees to over 300. By the time he died in 1994, the Harmon Construction Group had completed projects across Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, and he had left behind a family trust built with one specific intention: to ensure that everything he had built stayed inside the bloodline he had worked his entire life to protect. Raymond had inherited company shares, real estate holdings across multiple states, and investment accounts that his personal financial advisor managed from an office in Buckhead. He had been raised with the quiet confidence that comes from certainty. Certainty that the foundation beneath him was solid, that the name he carried had weight, and that whatever he wanted was, within reason, available to him. By his late 30s, he had come to understand that the wealth his grandfather had so carefully protected would eventually need an heir. He was not alarmed by this. He was simply aware of it, in the practical way of a man who intends to address something eventually. When he met Claire Donovan at a corporate dinner in the spring of 2018, he saw a woman who was composed, disciplined, and clearly capable. He pursued her. She was cautious, but not closed. By the fall of that year, they were spending every weekend together. Claire and Raymond married in September of 2019. The ceremony was held at a renovated historic estate outside Atlanta. Long white tables under string lights, a live band, lanterns hanging in the trees, an evening that photographs generously and stays in everyone's memory. Vanessa stood just behind Claire at the altar in a cream-colored gown. Patricia Donovan sat in the front row and did not try to hold back her tears. By every account from everyone who attended, it was one of those weddings that feels like a genuine promise. Not just between two people, but between two families, two histories, two sets of accumulated hopes being aligned into something meant to last. The photographs stayed on Claire's phone for years. She looked at them the way you look at a document you believe is true. Without question, without examination, with complete faith in what had been recorded. She had no reason to look more carefully. Not yet. The first year of their marriage was, by Claire's own account, largely what she had hoped for. Raymond was present. He was generous. He took her to dinner without occasion. He remembered things she told him in passing and referred to them weeks later. He attended her church without being asked twice. He treated Patricia Donovan with a consistency and warmth that earned the older woman's approval. And Patricia, who had seen what a man's absence looked like and knew what it cost, did not give that approval easily. They bought a house north of Atlanta and talked openly about turning one of the rooms into a nursery. They were not in a rush. They were building something together, with the faith of people who have not yet been tested. Claire was happy. What she did not know was that part of the happiness she was feeling was being generated by information she did not have. What Claire did not know, and what she had no mechanism to know, was that the affair between Raymond and Vanessa had already begun before the end of their first year of marriage. It had not started with a single decisive moment. It had emerged the way these things often do, from proximity, from access, from the gradual erosion of a line that both parties had probably told themselves at the beginning they would not cross. Vanessa had always been around, and Claire had encouraged it. She wanted her family close to her husband, and her husband integrated into her family. She had invited Vanessa to dinners, weekends, and the ongoing household presence that people associate with warmth and openness. She had watched Raymond and Vanessa laugh together at those dinners, and felt nothing but satisfaction at having built a life where the people she loved could love each other. She had read every signal as confirmation of something good. She had simply not yet asked the right question. There is a specific kind of carefulness that people adopt when they are doing something wrong and believe they are doing it safely. The phone goes face down on the table when certain names come up. A direct question receives an answer that arrives a half-second too slowly, as if routed through a filter before it is spoken. The laughter between two people who share a secret carries a frequency slightly different from ordinary laughter, more guarded, more aware of being observed. These patterns are documented in research on intimate deception. They are real and observable, and they were present in Claire's home during this entire period. But Claire was not looking for them, because she had never been given a reason to look. Raymond and Vanessa understood this. They moved carefully in the way people move when they know precisely what they are risking. They kept their communication through channels Claire was not monitoring. For nearly 2 years, it was working, and it was during those 2 years, when they had reason to believe they were entirely safe, that they made the decision that would eventually cost them everything. In the second year of their marriage, Claire and Raymond began actively trying to start a family. It became the organizing hope of their shared life, the thing they discussed in private, that Raymond asked about from business trips, that Claire tracked with the patient precision that is, in itself, a form of love. She adjusted her diet. She took her vitamins with a consistency she had not applied to anything outside of work. She downloaded every tracking application available and used them without fail. Month after month passed, nothing happened. Her OB/GYN ran standard blood work and imaging and found nothing abnormal. She referred Claire to a reproductive endocrinologist. The specialist ran additional tests. Everything came back within normal range. They used the clinical phrase that would become the center of Claire's life for the next 2 years, unexplained infertility. A term that means, in practical terms, that the instruments available cannot identify a cause. What no one in any of those offices knew was that the cause was in Claire's kitchen cabinet, tucked behind the coffee jar she reached for every single morning. Raymond performed the role of the supportive husband during this period with considerable skill and remarkable consistency. He attended appointments. He held her hand in waiting rooms. He said the right things at the right moments. That she was not broken, that it would happen, that they were in it together. On Claire's birthday during their 3rd year of marriage, he made a donation to a fertility awareness nonprofit in her name and shared it publicly as a gift. She received dozens of messages from friends telling her how fortunate she was to have him, and Vanessa, who was in the house at least twice a week, always arriving with food or preparing something in the kitchen, always warm and expressive in her concern for Claire's situation, was consistently among the most present voices in her life during this period. She listened when Claire was depleted after difficult appointments. She prayed with her. She sat with her in the specific way that only someone you have trusted for 20 years can sit with you. The performance never broke. Not once, not across 3 years. By the end of the 3rd year of trying, the weight of it had become the defining texture of Claire's daily life. She had consulted 4 different specialists. She had completed 2 separate rounds of hormonal treatment, each requiring daily injections and the specific emotional vulnerability that the process produces in a woman. She had started and quietly abandoned fertility journaling, because looking at the blank pages had begun to feel like a verdict. She had attended 3 baby showers for close friends in 18 months. Each one she attended with grace, and each one she left early to cry in her car before driving home alone. She had begun, in her most private thoughts, to wonder whether the closed door was telling her something. Whether there was a meaning in it she had been failing to understand. That is the specific cruelty of what was being done to her. It had redirected her grief entirely inward. It had produced, in a woman who had never had reason to doubt herself, a sustained and deepening self-doubt. And the people responsible for it were in her home twice a week, watching it work. During this same period, something in the household had shifted in a way that Claire could feel without being able to locate. Raymond was more frequently unavailable. His travel had increased. He was physically present, but distributed in his attention in a way that was different from the first year of their marriage, there without being fully there. Vanessa continued with the same frequency, filling the conversational and emotional spaces that Raymond was incrementally vacating. Claire had begun to wonder privately whether the fertility journey was creating a distance in her marriage. She did not know how to close. She had no framework to place correctly what she was observing. The framework would have required a question she had not yet formed. She was living inside a constructed deception, and the construction was holding. Until the morning of April 14th, when she reached to the back of her kitchen cabinet, and her hand found something it did not expect. It was a Wednesday. Claire woke before her alarm, which she had begun to do with some regularity in those years, her sleep lighter, more easily interrupted by small sounds. Raymond was still in bed. Vanessa had stayed in the guest room after a late dinner the previous evening. Claire came downstairs at 5:45 and went to make coffee. She reached for the front jar, found it nearly empty, and reached toward the back of the shelf for the backup. Her hand closed around something that was not the jar. She pulled it out. It was a small Ziploc bag, partially full, containing a fine white powder she did not recognize. Her first thought was ordinary, some supplement Raymond had stored there, or something left from a recipe. She opened the bag and brought it close. No distinctive smell. She photographed it on her phone. She pinched a small amount onto a folded piece of paper, sealed it, and placed it in her purse. She put the bag back at the same angle against the same surface. She made her coffee from a separate jar she had purchased the weekend before. When Vanessa came downstairs 40 minutes later, Claire poured her a cup from the same pot, said good morning, and smiled the way she always had. Then she drove to work. She said nothing to anyone. What happened in the 3 days that followed is something Claire has described only in fragments, and the fragmentation is itself worth noting. There was no dramatic internal rupture, no cascade of suddenly recontextualized memories. There was instead a very quiet, very deliberate shifting of gears. She went to work, she came home, she made dinner. She sat on the sofa with Raymond and talked about his week with the same warmth she always brought to the conversation. She slept, she woke, she did all of it again. What she was doing underneath all of that ordinary's surface was thinking with a precision she had not previously needed to apply to her personal life. If the powder was benign, her caution cost her nothing. If it was not benign, then what she did in the next few days would determine everything that followed for the rest of her life. She was not going to move until she understood which it was. That discipline, the absolute refusal to act before the picture was complete, is what made everything that came after possible. On the fourth day, a Saturday, Claire drove north on the interstate for 2 hours. She had spent Thursday evening researching independent private laboratories that accepted walk-in samples without insurance documentation or physician referral. She found 3 options within reasonable distance and chose the one farthest from Atlanta, with no visible connection to any medical network she or Raymond used. She submitted the sample under the name Michelle Carter. She paid $420 in cash. She provided a prepaid phone number and a burner email address she had created the previous night on a device Raymond had never seen. The intake technician processed her paperwork without questions. She drove home. She made dinner that evening. She attended church on Sunday and sat in her usual pew beside Raymond and listened to the sermon. She was waiting. She had moved from fear into something more operational, a state she recognized from the most demanding moments in her professional life. And that transition, once made, does not easily reverse itself. She would later describe the 10 days between submitting the sample and receiving the results as the strangest stretch of time in her life, not because of anxiety, but because of a calm that felt qualitatively different from ordinary calm. It was the calm of someone who has acknowledged to herself, privately and completely, that something is badly wrong and that the only open question remaining is the precise extent of it. She continued her normal life with complete consistency. She was warm with Vanessa. She was present with Raymond. She had not yet begun building what would become the folder. She was waiting for the report to tell her whether there was a folder to build. But she did begin paying attention differently during those 10 days. Not to Raymond and Vanessa, not yet. She was watching herself. She was reviewing, with the clear and slightly merciless eye that her mother had modeled for her, the explanation she had accepted inside this marriage without examination. She was preparing herself, should the results confirm what she feared, to face the full picture without flinching. She opened the email in the parking lot of a grocery store, 2 miles from her house on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days after she had submitted the sample. The compound was identified as a synthetic progestogen derivative, a hormone-based substance used clinically to suppress ovulation and interrupt the menstrual cycle. The report included a summary stating plainly that consistent ingestion of this compound over weeks or months would significantly reduce or eliminate a woman's ability to conceive and could in many cases produce a presentation medically indistinguishable from unexplained infertility. Unexplained infertility. The exact diagnosis she had carried for 3 years. The clinical term her doctors had used. The explanation she had spent 3 years trying to accept as hers. Claire sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. She read the report twice. She closed the email and placed her phone on the passenger seat. Then she drove home. She made dinner. She sat across from Raymond and talked about nothing in particular. Underneath every word of that conversation, the plan had already begun. There is a moment in every story like this one, a moment that does not look like a turning point but is, where the person who has been harmed makes the choice that defines every single outcome that follows. For some people, that choice is to confront, to demand answers immediately, to make the wrongdoing visible at once, and ensure the people responsible know they have been discovered. That choice, for all its emotional relief in the moment, almost always produces incomplete results. Denials are issued. Evidence disappears before it can be preserved. Lawyers are retained, and a competing narrative is assembled before the other side has prepared. The person who was harmed ends up defending herself in a version of events written entirely by the people who hurt her. Claire Harmon did not make that choice. She made a different one. She decided she was not going to move until the picture was entirely complete. Until the case she was building was so thorough that no narrative available to Raymond or Vanessa could go unanswered by the record. She was going to be patient. She was going to be methodical. And she was going to become exactly the kind of opponent that neither of them had ever thought to prepare for. Within 1 week of receiving the lab results, Claire contacted a family law attorney. She did not use anyone recommended by her company's legal team, and she did not consult anyone in her professional or social circle. She identified a firm 2 counties over through independent research, a practice with no visible connection to anyone in her life. She arranged an appointment with the senior partner, a woman named Sandra Pierce, who had been practicing family law for 26 years, and who had, by her peers' assessment, seen nearly every variation of how a marriage can end. Claire told her only that she suspected marital infidelity and needed a referral to an experienced private investigator. Sandra Pierce provided 3 names. Claire interviewed all 3 by phone and hired the one with the most documented experience in covert domestic surveillance. She paid his $6,000 retainer in cash, drawn from a savings account she had maintained since college, an account in her maiden name at a separate bank that Raymond had never known existed. It had accumulated interest for a decade. It was ready the moment she needed it. She stopped consuming anything Vanessa had prepared. She accomplished this without announcement and without any visible change in her behavior that the household would have registered as unusual. She told Raymond she was following a nutritional protocol from a specialist she had started seeing about the fertility situation, a specific plan that required her to prepare all her own food. He said that sounded reasonable. He asked no follow-up questions, no curiosity about the specialist, no questions about what the protocol involved or how long it would last. He simply accepted the explanation at its surface and moved on. That complete absence of curiosity told Claire something she filed carefully in the back of her mind. A husband with nothing to conceal would have asked something. He asked nothing. From that point forward, she sourced her own food separately, stored it separately, and prepared everything herself. The household continued in its ordinary rhythm. Vanessa continued to visit. Raymond continued to come home for dinner. Claire continued to be, to all appearances, exactly the woman they believed they knew. 3 weeks into the investigators' engagement, a manila envelope arrived at Sandra Pierce's firm containing the first significant deliverable. 12 photographs taken across 4 separate occasions. Raymond and Vanessa together at a hotel in Nashville on the weekend of March 9th. The same weekend, Raymond had told Claire he was attending an industry conference for construction professionals. The conference had been real. He had attended 2 sessions on the Friday. And then he had checked into a hotel room under his own name and spent the remainder of that weekend with Vanessa Cole. The photographs documented their arrival in the lobby, the elevator, a corridor on the same floor. The timestamps were precise to the minute. Attached to the photographs were credit card transaction records obtained through legal channels. Raymond, S-card, the hotel charge, a restaurant dinner on Saturday evening, room service on Sunday morning. It was the first piece of a picture that would eventually run 27 pages. Claire examined every photograph carefully. She filed them. She told the investigator to continue. Over the following 6 weeks, additional documentation arrived at Sandra Pierce's office at steady intervals. Phone records showing 2 years of sustained contact between Raymond Harmon and Vanessa Cole. Not just the frequency and duration of calls, but a chronological pattern of communication that, mapped against the hotel stays, told a complete story without requiring a single message to be read. Additional hotel records from Charlotte, Birmingham, and Memphis, each documented, each time-stamped, each cross-referenced against dates Raymond had presented to Claire as business travel. The folder grew. Claire kept it in a fire-safe box in her car, locked with a key she wore on a chain she did not remove. She made dinner every evening. She sat across the table from her husband every night. She smiled at Vanessa when she came to visit. She never once let what she was carrying show on her face. She had been raised by a woman who moved forward without announcement. She understood, at a cellular level, what that required. 61 days after she stopped consuming the compound, on a Tuesday morning, Claire took a pregnancy test in the single-occupancy bathroom of a gas station 40 minutes from her home. The result appeared immediately. She sat in her car in that parking lot for a very long time. She had constructed this moment in her imagination hundreds of times over 3 years, had placed it in different settings, surrounded it with different emotional colors, imagined the people she would call first. She had imagined relief. She had imagined joy. She had imagined something releasing inside her that had been held tightly closed for years. What she felt instead, in that gas station parking lot, was something quieter and more complex. The weight of what she had discovered, sitting alongside what she had just confirmed, and the understanding that these 2 things were not separate stories. They were one story, and she was the only person alive who could see how they connected. She drove home without stopping. She sealed the test in an envelope and locked it in the fire-safe box. She made dinner. She did not tell Raymond. Not yet. There was one more thing she needed to understand first. Claire had asked Sandra Pierce, as part of her broader preparation, to examine the legal and financial structure of the Harmon family estate. She had not known exactly what she was looking for. She had simply understood, from her professional background in operations and business administration, that complex wealth structures carry complex conditions, and that those conditions sometimes contain provisions that have not been actively reviewed in years. What Sandra Pierce produced, after 2 weeks of careful document examination, landed with a quiet weight that neither woman had anticipated. The original Harmon family trust, drawn up by James Harmon in 1981 and never formally amended by any subsequent generation, contained a core operating clause. In the event of the legal dissolution of Raymond Harmon's marriage, or in the event of his death, all assets held within the family trust would transfer immediately and entirely to Raymond Harmon's biological children. If no biological children existed at the time of dissolution or death, those assets would revert in their entirety to the Harmon Family Charitable Foundation, established by James Harmon in 1988. Sandra Pierce read that clause to Claire over the phone on a Thursday afternoon. When she finished, she waited. The silence between them lasted long enough that she asked if Claire was still on the line. She was. What Claire was doing in that silence was not calculating. The calculation had completed the moment she heard the words. What she was doing was absorbing the specific weight of what she had just been told. Raymond Harmon had spent 4 years inside a marriage with Claire Donovan, including nearly 3 years of actively preventing her from getting pregnant, while sitting directly on top of a legal document that made her pregnancy and her child the single most powerful instrument in his entire family estate. His grandfather had built something extraordinary and had protected it with a clause designed specifically to keep it inside the bloodline across generations. And Raymond, who had trusted his own cleverness and Vanessa's loyalty and Claire's blindness above everything else, had never once thought to read that document. He had never checked. He was approximately 12 weeks away from learning exactly what that had cost him. She told Raymond about the pregnancy on a Sunday evening at the dinner table after a quiet meal. She said it simply, and then she set her fork down and watched his face with the full attention she had been training for months. What she saw was not joy in its uncomplicated form. It was something more composite, surprise, and then, behind the surprise, a very rapid processing she could see moving through him in real time. A pregnancy changed things for Raymond in multiple directions simultaneously, and she could see him arriving at each of them. It meant the trust clause was now active. It meant that any version of a quiet exit he may have been privately constructing was now vastly more complicated. It meant that what he chose to do next carried consequences he had not prepared for. She watched him decide to stay, to perform, for as long as necessary, the man he had been presenting throughout this marriage. He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him take it. Her hands were completely steady. She was thinking about Tuesday. The divorce filing was delivered to Raymond Harmon's downtown Atlanta office by a process server at 9:45 on a Tuesday morning. It was 27 pages. Sandra Pierce had organized it with a precision that Raymond's own legal counsel, years later, would describe simply as overwhelming. The first page was the petition for divorce on grounds of marital infidelity. Pages 2 through 9 contained the photographic evidence and corresponding financial records. Raymond and Vanessa at hotels in Nashville, Charlotte, Birmingham, and Memphis, each occurrence documented with photographs, timestamps, and credit card transactions, each date cross-referenced against the account Raymond had given Claire of his professional travel schedule. Pages 10 through 15 contained 2 years of annotated phone records. The pattern of communication between Raymond Harmon and Vanessa Cole, mapped chronologically against the documented hotel stays, required no interpretation. Page 16 was the lab report identifying the synthetic progestogen derivative found in the Harmon household. Pages 17 and 18 contained the medical affidavit from a board-certified reproductive endocrinologist who had reviewed the lab report alongside Claire's complete 3-year fertility treatment record and issued a formal clinical statement. Consistent exposure to the identified compound over the documented period would have prevented conception in an otherwise fertile woman with clinical certainty. Page 19 was a sworn declaration from a private toxicologist, signed and notarized, certifying the compound's precise identity and confirming its measurable effect on human fertility under sustained exposure. 3 years of unexplained infertility. Explained in 3 pages. Raymond had sat beside Claire in those examination rooms. He had listened to every specialist deliver every carefully worded verdict. He had held her hand on the drive home and said the right things every single time. He had helped construct the emotional weight of a problem he was personally responsible for sustaining. Every page of those 3 documents sat directly alongside that memory. Page 20 of the filing was a legal memorandum prepared by a specialist in intentional harm litigation. It outlined in precise statutory language the basis for criminal charges against both Raymond Harmon and Vanessa Cole. What had been done to Claire Harmon? The deliberate, sustained, covert administration of a substance interfering with her reproductive function without her knowledge or consent met the threshold definitions of criminal administration of a harmful substance under Georgia law. The memorandum also engaged a legal theory constructed around the growing body of law on reproductive coercion, a framework through which several states had moved to codify this category of harm as a specific criminal offense with its own prosecutorial basis. The memorandum closed with a clear statement. Should Raymond Harmon choose to contest any element of the divorce proceedings or resist cooperation with the terms as presented, a formal criminal complaint would be filed simultaneously with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, naming both Raymond Harmon and Vanessa Cole as co-principals. Raymond's attorney reviewed the full filing by noon that Tuesday. He called Raymond and told him, directly, without softening, that there was one path forward. He recommended taking it before the close of business. Raymond Harmon cooperated. Within 72 hours of receiving the filing, his legal team communicated full consent to the divorce terms in writing. There was no counter-petition. There was no attempt to challenge the investigator's methodology, the laboratory's credentials, or the medical expert's conclusions. There was no competing narrative submitted through any legal channel. No statement to the press. No communication through mutual friends or family seeking to establish an alternative account of what had happened. Raymond Harmon, who had entered this marriage as the heir to a 3-state construction enterprise representing decades of accumulated black, generational wealth, signed the consent documents at his attorney's office on a Friday afternoon. The man who had for 4 years managed a marriage, an affair, and the legal exposure of both, had at the end nothing left to manage. The case built against him in 22 months of quiet, unannounced work had left no gap through which a defense could be constructed. He signed, and the last piece moved into place. The Harmon Family Trust was triggered by the official dissolution, filing the moment it was accepted and docketed by the Fulton County Superior Court. Claire's child, Raymond Harmon's only biological heir, the one Claire had been prevented from conceiving for nearly 3 years and had finally carried to term after removing the obstruction from her own life, was named the immediate primary beneficiary of the full trust under the operating terms of the 1981 document. The Harmon family's legal counsel reviewed the situation and delivered their finding without commentary or sentiment. The language of the trust was clear. The conditions had been met, the assets transferred, the real estate portfolio spanning Georgia and Tennessee, the investment accounts, the company's shares in the Harmon Construction Group, the operational entity that had been the source and symbol of the family standing for 60 years. All of it transferred to a trust in the name of a child who had not yet been born. Raymond Harmon retained his personal bank accounts. That was everything that remained. It is worth pausing on the full weight of that transfer, not in abstract terms, but in real ones. The Harmon family real estate holdings at the time of dissolution included a portfolio of residential and commercial properties across Atlanta, Savannah, Nashville, and Knoxville, built across 60 years through contracts, reinvestment, and the compounding that comes from never stopping the work. The investment accounts represented returns on capital that had survived multiple economic cycles, returns that James Harmon had generated in decades when black business ownership in the American South required not just intelligence and discipline, but a specific battle-hardened resilience that most people today have only a theoretical understanding of. The Harmon Construction Group had an active contract portfolio, a trained workforce, and an operational reputation built across 2 generations. All of it was now in a trust that Raymond could not access, could not liquidate, and could not direct. His grandfather had intended for the wealth to go to his children. In the end, because of choices Raymond made, and choices Claire responded to, it did, exactly as written, exactly as James Harmon had always intended. Vanessa Cole had organized her understanding of the future around a specific set of assumptions that had, over 2 years of sustained deception, come to feel like certainties, that Raymond would eventually leave Claire, that what waited on the other side of that departure would be a life worth the cost of what had been done to get there. She had believed Raymond's wealth was a permanent feature of who he was, not a conditional inheritance held under terms set by a grandfather who had been dead for 30 years, but something intrinsic to the man himself. The Raymond Harmon, who appeared on the other side of the divorce proceedings, was, in every human sense, the same man she had spent 2 years selecting. His personality had not changed. His manner had not changed. What had changed was the context in which all of it operated. And without the estate, the company, and the standing the Harmon name had represented, the foundation of what she had built her desire around no longer existed in the form she had planned for. She remained in Atlanta for 7 months after the divorce was finalized. Then she relocated. She has not been publicly heard from since. Claire Harmon's daughter was born in the spring, in an Atlanta hospital, in the same city where James Harmon had once started a construction business with a borrowed truck and a determination to build something that would outlast him. Claire named her Elaine. The name belonged to no one in the Harmon family and carried no connection to any part of what had happened. It was simply a name she had always loved, clear and unhurried, sounding to her like something unencumbered, something that did not carry any weight it had not chosen for itself. She returned to her career within a year of Elaine's birth. She has not given interviews. She has not spoken publicly about Raymond or Vanessa in any forum. People who know Claire today describe her in terms that are strikingly consistent across every account: calm, focused, generous in a specific and intentional way. A person who has come through something serious and emerged with her priorities clarified rather than distorted. She built her case. She filed it. She won. She moved forward. And that decision, to move forward rather than remain inside the story after it was settled, may be the most significant one she made in the entire account. There is a question worth sitting with before we close, and it is not about the law or the tactics in this story. It is a question about the condition that made the harm possible. What Raymond and Vanessa required to do what they did was not primarily opportunity or access, although they had both. What they required was Claire's trust. They needed her to remain inside a story that had been written for her, a story in which the people she loved most were exactly who they had presented themselves as being. They needed her not to look, not to examine, not to ask the questions that would have unraveled everything. And for nearly 3 years, that requirement was met. Not because Claire Harmon lacked intelligence or awareness, but because she was extending to the people closest to her the fundamental trust that makes a family possible. They used that goodness against her. And what this story ultimately demonstrates is that the goodness did not disappear when she found out. It did not turn into bitterness or recklessness or a desire to destroy. It became precise. It became patient. It became a 27-page document delivered on a Tuesday morning. And then it moved on, never raised her voice in a courtroom or in her home or in any exchange connected to this case. She never sent a message in anger. She never confronted anyone publicly, never made a scene at a gathering, never called Vanessa to deliver the speech that the situation might have seemed to call for. She took 22 months of deliberate, constructed betrayal and built from it a legal case that arrived fully formed on a Tuesday morning and left Raymond Harmon with nothing to say and nothing to fight. The discipline that required, to know what she knew and continue to live normally, to feel what she must have felt and continue to smile, to carry the weight of that folder in her mind, across every dinner and every ordinary evening, for nearly 2 years, while giving no visible sign of what was being assembled. That discipline is not reducible to a strategy. It is a form of strength that does not perform itself. It does not need an audience. It does not need to announce its arrival. It simply builds in the quiet, over time, with the patience of someone who understands that moving too soon is the same as not moving at all. And when it finally moves, everything built on dishonesty and the underestimation of a woman's capacity goes with it entirely. Before you leave this video, I want to ask you something I hope you carry with you. The signs were there throughout this story. A phone that always went face down on the table when certain people were in the room. Visits that were slightly too frequent to be entirely casual. A husband who accepted, without a single question, a significant change in his wife's daily routine. Small things that, looking back with the full picture in view, were not small at all. If you had been living that life, if you had been sitting exactly where Claire was sitting, would you have seen them earlier? Or would love have done to you exactly what it did to her? I want to hear what you think. Drop your city in the comments and tell us what part of this story stayed with you the longest. Tell us what Claire did right and what, if you were in her position, you believe you would have done differently. If this story reached someone in you who needed to hear it, share it with the person in your life who needs to hear it too. Subscribe to Blood Betrayer Files so you are here for every story we bring you. Because what is coming next will challenge everything you think you know about the people who are supposed to be in your corner. Every word of it is true, and every word of it matters.